am excited to be sitting down with my good friend, Matt Walter. He is, well, I'll let you do your own introduction. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm the curator of collections at the Museum of the Big Bend. I have been there as the curator since October of 2003. Before that, of course, I came to Soros to got my degree, got my bachelor's, master's degree in history. Before that, I spent 20 years in the United States Coast Guard. Took me to 19 different countries. Enjoyed that. Originally from Lake Jackson, Texas. But grew up in southern Brazil, where my parents were high school teachers for the Methodist Church.
Oh, wow. Seems very interesting. You said you've been curator at the museum. Tell us a little bit more about that. What kind of...
Well, the curator of collections, but I also do exhibits. I'll tell you about the most recent exhibit we just opened up. It was opened on, finished hanging it on Friday. Had to do all the hanging at the museum, and it's now open to the public. And it's a Edward Curtis photography show featuring some of his amazing Native American photographs. And that's basically out of our collections. And I supplemented that with some historical maps from kind of the same period, but focusing on Native Americans.
Which is a little bit more your forte as...
That's my specialty, is I'm a cartographic historian. And I did my master's degree on the map of the U.S.-Mexico border. I have written articles and chapters in books and guides and things on cartography and history of maps. At this show, for example, we have the oldest map in our collection, 1513, original 1513 Watson-Moeller map of America. By then, he made the 1507 map and put the name America on it after he met with Amerigo Vespucci. But by 1513, he figured there's more knowledge of how large the continent is. So he tried to take the name America off and just put Terra Nova on there. But it was too late. The name America stuck. But that 1513 map is interesting, and it's interesting because of why it was done. And there's an extra word on there, on that map, called Parillas. Actually written over where Texas would have been. Of course, they didn't really know Texas yet, or even the Gulf of Mexico, but they're on there. You can tell what you're looking at, and it's a woodcut. I think 13 copies exist in the world, and we have one of them through our donor, Marty Davis, who passed away a couple of years ago. I'll talk more about Marty later. But this 1513 map was done because they figured out this is not India, this is not China, like Columbus, I believe, went to his deathbed believing. This is a different continent. Then the big question became, if this is a new world, are the people there human? With the thought process being, if you're human, you must be mentioned in Genesis. And of course, Native Americans aren't directly mentioned in Genesis, but in 1513, the year this map was made, Pope Leo X decided that Native Americans were human, based on the following rationale: that up until this point, the world had only been balanced on three legs: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now the world is balanced on four legs, therefore it's more stable, therefore it's more perfect, therefore it's more the way God intended it to be, therefore Native Americans are human. And the Pope then continued, therefore they can be baptized or enslaved if they refuse baptism. And that was his ruling. And to indicate that the world was more balanced, more, quote, on par, there's a Latin word written over right where Texas is, Parillas, the fourth part of the world, the balanced part of the world. And so that's one of the maps that we have as part of the show. Another map we have is the 1867 Kilo map. It is the largest map ever printed by the Department of Interior up to that point. This is 2 years after the U.S. Civil War, and that's when Congress passed the first post-Civil War Indian Reservation Act and assigned reservations for the Indians to go live in. Indians were been relocated. They were all moved across the Mississippi River, the Indian Territory, and then reservations were assigned. Indians were not citizens of the United States until 1924. And they were not allowed to travel to Washington, D.C. to stand up for themselves, represent themselves. So what happened in 1867 was Congress hired 177 Indian agents. And those Indian agents were supposed to go to the reservation, find out what the concerns of those Indians are, and then go back to Washington, D.C. and represent them. For those Indian agents, Congress printed up a special version of the Kilo map. That's a large, 7 by 8 foot map, which they then cut into squares, glued onto a canvas backing, so it would be folded up into this leather pocket. And the Indian agent can then travel to their reservation, or his reservation. There were no women hired to be Indian agents. Most of the Indian agents hired were wasting humanity, never traveled to the reservation, stayed in Washington, D.C., took vacations, took their salary, and made up stories, but never went to the reservation. And over the years, those maps were all thought to be gone. But there were a few Indian agents that found out that they did take their job seriously and did travel to the reservation. And our donor, Marty Davis, found out that one of those descendants of the Indian agents was having an estate sale in Kansas. So he decided to go travel to Kansas and go through things. Marty loved digging through things, anything old, anything paper, or whatever it might be. Anyways, he's there and he opens up this trunk, and inside the trunk is the Kilo map folded up, the Indian agent map. Even the Library of Congress doesn't have one. So Marty went to the lady and he goes, "I want to buy the map." She goes, "No." She goes, "Why not?" She goes, "You got to buy the whole trunk." Marty said, "Okay, I'll buy the whole trunk. How much?" She quoted him a ridiculously low price of $1,000. Marty said, "Oh no, you have no idea what you have." I'm not going to get into what he paid, but he paid a whole lot more than that. And that map is now on display. The only known complete Kilo map in existence is now on display at the Museum of Big Bend. So we have it.
With regards to the Curtis photography stuff, did he spend a lot of time in the Big Bend?
Not in the Big Bend, no. No, he traveled in the American West, mostly the high plains and the Rocky Mountains.
Further up
Right.
north.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep. But our Curtis exhibit, the Curtis photographs, came from Marty also.
I was going to wonder about that because when I was looking up some of the information, what I saw it was that a big stockpile of the Curtis photography stuff, whatever you call it,
Photo reward. Yep.
Was found just somebody going through some old stuff basically.
Well, yeah, of course, Marty donated that. That was another donation, and then we also pulled out artifacts from our collection, Native American collection, donated by other folks along the time, and so then we have that whole show tied up, tied in with the maps. And for example, we have also part of the show. We have the 1898 map showing the extermination of the buffalo by Hornaday. And Hornaday made this map. He was a curator for the Smithsonian. And it was government policy to send buffalo hunters west to go kill the buffalo, exterminate the buffalo, so that the Indians would stay on the reservations. And the buffalo were almost exterminated, and the Smithsonian sent Hornaday west to collect some hides so they could stuff some animals before they went completely extinct back for the Smithsonian. Well, he gets west and finds out there are still a few herds alive. There's 500 or more left in Canada. There's 25 left in Texas. And so Hornaday gets involved in the conservation movement along with Theodore Roosevelt, Charles Goodnight, the rancher. And that's why today we have 30,000 American bison still alive, and so we have his map.
That's nice. That's awesome. Being a cartographer, are these some of your favorite exhibits that are now on display at the Big Bend?
Yeah, that's some of my favorites. Also downstairs, I have an exhibit, just 10 maps to showcase the more than 2,000 historical maps that we have. There's 10 maps that are all original to the Republic of Texas period.
Okay, I had somebody ask this question because I did try to get some responses from other people. Somebody wanted to ask me how it is that Texas ended up stretching all the way up to Wyoming. How we ended up getting all that.
Well, we didn't.
You didn't.
It was because of the 1819 Adam-Onis Treaty. And even though they had a vague idea of what the boundaries might be, that then became the northern boundary of Texas as far as Texas claimed it, but that was not the northern boundary of Texas the way Mexico claimed it. So the boundaries, especially in those areas that were, the geography was very uncertain, hadn't been mapped yet, you had never had boots on the ground at that point. Yes, on current maps, when you show, on more modern maps, when you show Texas, you can show it extending all the way up in present-day Wyoming, but they didn't know enough to even map it back then. That all came later. So Texas didn't do any land claims or bring impresarios in, like Stephen F. Austin to send them to Wyoming.
There are people, who say things. Obviously, some Texans are known for their tall tales.
Sure.
I've heard of people talk about signs about it being Texas in Wyoming, but who knows? Well, you probably know better than I would, but I had to be skeptical.
I ran across a personal sign that a homemaker had put on there and had the Texas flag flying, and he goes, "This used to once be Texas," with a sign out in front of his house. And yes, it was claimed by Texas. Yes, it was claimed by Spain. Yes, it was claimed by France. But it's easy to make a claim like that.
Yes.
It's a little bit different than actually going in and measuring latitude and longitude and making a map and figuring out where you are on the surface of the earth.
That was another thing that I was surprised to run into when talking to people on the internet, is that people were not aware that the first land grants were secured not from Mexico but from Spain.
From Spain, absolutely. Of course, Spain claimed basically the whole American Southwest, and they in California, you can go visit Fort Ross right now, which is one of the upper limits of the Spanish claimed territory and the lower limits of the Russian claimed territory. And there's a great state park. You can go visit there. And of course, Alaska was all claimed by Russia also. Mm-hmm. And but yes, the American West was claimed by Spain, claimed by France. Making a claim is on land that you don't have any really concept of what's there yet is easier to do than sometimes maintaining that claim when they finally figure out what's there.
My understanding is that a lot of this South American territory, South North American territory, was considered pretty hostile.
Well, the American Southwest was hostile for various reasons. One, because of the weather. Two, because of the terrain. And then three, of course, because of the Native American tribes that were inhabiting here. And when you talk about Native American tribes, it's not like there was that they all of a sudden just popped up and sat there waiting peacefully for the arrival of the Europeans. American tribes are in flux. They are moving. Yes, they're moving on foot, but some are nomadic, more nomadic than others. There are some tribes that groups of nations, you want to call them that were semi-nomadic or semi-sedentary, and they, especially if they were had a lifestyle based on fishing, they could settle along some rivers during the summertime and do that. But it's not going to be until the invention of agriculture and until the domestication of corn in Mexico, and as that spreads northward, that you're going to start getting sedentary tribes, the ones that are able to stay in one spot and not have to follow the game herds, and usually along the rivers. They'll settle along the river, plant their, be able to stay there year-round, while other tribes are semi-nomadic and other tribes are being still completely nomadic. Now, all that will change dramatically and drastically in a fairly short time once you have what's called the Columbian Exchange. Named after Columbus, the Columbian Exchange is the biological exchange between the New World and the Old World. That's what makes Columbus important, is this biological exchange that he sets into motion. And one of the things that comes over is the horse. And of course, you get cattle and sheep and all that. But all that will, especially the horse, will dramatically change the Native American lifestyle. Some of the sedentary tribes did not adopt the horse. They didn't need to. Some of the, especially nomadic tribes, became masters of the plains and started pushing other people out of the way. So it makes for a very interesting and convoluted. So you can't just say, okay, here's a map of the Native Americans before Columbus, or here's a map of the Native Americans in 1770. It's not. It's going to be different in 1870 and so on. So
I think that's probably one of the big differences that the North Americans or the European colonizers had with the natives. They didn't see land claims the same way that other people did. They fought for what they could hold,
right,
or they followed what sustained them,
and they're going to fight for resources more so than land.
Yes, sir.
And where are where's the rivers that are holding the fish? Where do the game herds go to winter?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you're going to build your winter camps. And of course, other people might want those same winter camps.
Yeah.
And of course, winter makes it hard to fight too. But it's all interesting. Makes for some amazing history that's much more complicated than people think.
Sure, absolutely. You had mentioned some exciting stories that you had to tell when I first approached you, and I'm curious to get to those before.
Okay, yeah, before we run out of time here.
Sure.
But one of the stories you asked me about Scotland. Have you ever been to Scotland?
I have not yet.
Okay, well, you need to go. Scotland is an amazing country, and I think because of the terrain of Scotland, because of all the ports in Scotland, they are natural seafarers and explorers. And they would go out and probably had a lot of has to do with Viking heritage also, and they would make maps, but they would go explore, and some of the earliest explorers of Africa and so on were Scottish heritage. Anyways, something that's interesting, and we have a map at the museum. From 1695, most people realize today that, and this is something that Texas and Scotland seem to have in common, and we share this as a heritage. We were at one time both independent countries, and Scotland was independent in the 1600s, even the late 1600s, and they decided to compete with some of those other European powers that were establishing colonies in the New World, like France and Spain and England were all accepted. Well, Scotland decided to establish a colony, and they went in it full bore. There were a few problems, however. Where they chose to establish their colony is today the Darien in Panama. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Darien, but today, for example, you can take the Pan American Highway all the way from Alaska down to Tierra del Fuego. Nice paved highway the whole way, except for one spot, the Darien. There is no highway in the Darien. After you cross on the south side of the Panama Canal, you have a couple 100 miles of complete jungle wilderness, almost impassable trees and swamps and everything. So what you have to do, if you're trying to do it by car, you have to put your car on a boat to go around to Columbia and get back on there and get back on the highway that way. Well, it was in the Darien that Scotland decided to build their empire. And they will send a few thousand settlers to the Darien. I think 2 expeditions, more than 4,000 people. ended up losing to basically tropical diseases, more than 80% of them. Scotland called the original name of Scotland was Caledonia, the old name. So they called this New Caledonia. They called the capital New Edinburgh. They had maps. They sent these 4,000 people there basically to die. And they put around a quarter of their entire national budget into the Darien experiment. It failed. 7 years later, because they were broke, they had to join the United Kingdom. They had to join England, forming the United Kingdom. And so that ties up with some of your interests in Scotland, why the Scottish, and of course they continue to send our explorers out and so on. But they gave up on their own colony in the New World.
Basically, we started the same thing here.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other cool stories that you have in info that you wanted to?
No, that might come up in conversation here.
All right. We were talking about how some of those tribes became masters of the horse.
Masters of the Plains.
Masters of the Plains. And I wanted to talk about some of the stories that I read. Were some things that some of the Texas Rangers in the early days had specifically learned from.
Okay, that's going to come much later, of course. Mm-hmm. The tribes were already spreading by the 1700s. Mm-hmm. For example, the Apaches, which are what we have out here, they're latecomers. They are going to arrive in Texas after the Spanish, and they're a fascinating tribe nation. They were probably left the Arctic around the time of Christ, began slowly moving southward, and they probably reached the area around Nebraska, Kansas, as the horse went wild and spread northward. And there were Native American tribes that adapted to the horse better than they did. Tribes like the Sioux, the Crow, and the Cheyenne. The Sioux are fascinating, a whole different story. Fascinating tribe that had high numbers and were not experiencing most of the die-off due to European diseases. Anyways, these tribes began expanding across the Great Plains, pushing other tribes out of the way. It is going to be probably the Sioux that are going to end up pushing the Comanche into Texas. It's going to be the Comanche that are going to push the Apache westward into West Texas. And of course, another group that ended up going a little bit further west was the Navajo. They were both speak a language related to the Inuit up in the Arctic. So those tribes are definitely in flux. It's going to be, of course, this is before Texas existed as Texas. Right. But getting back to the Texas Rangers, by the time they're here, it was policy to exterminate the Indians, to eliminate the Indians, to get rid of the Indians. Texas didn't even have any reservations. You didn't give an option. If they stayed, they died. They had to leave. We did that with the Caddo Indian back east. They had to move to Louisiana. And they're still in Louisiana. And they can still come visit the Caddo Indian Mountains in West Texas, or in East Texas, or in the Piney Woods, but most of them still stay in Louisiana. In this fight for land, I guess the Rangers are going to learn, and this is before while the Rangers are still kind of a private organization run by ranchers and the governor, with the purpose of clearing the land of the hostiles. Mm-hmm. I guess what the Rangers learned, they needed more firepower, and that's when they went to the 6-shooter. Right. And they also learned that they needed to be more ruthless than the Indians, and they were, right, in many cases.
How many different tribes are you aware of, or can you think of, that were actually inhabiting?
Oh, in Texas? I have to go back and look at my lecture notes, but probably at least 20. These 20 tribes. Probably the oldest tribe to actually settle in Texas, probably the Tonkawa. Of course, down there on along the Texas coast, you had Native Americans whose lifestyle depended on fishing, like the Bronqua. You had the fishermen and hunters, like the Powhatan. You had in the Piney Woods, you had the Caddo Indians, which were part of the much larger Indian mound builders, which extended all the way up to St. Louis. That whole area up there, Mississippi, up the Mississippi River, and built not just funeral mounds, but also temple mounds and ceremonial mounds, and mounds shaped like snakes and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that, and then of course you're going to have the Comanche, and you're going to end up with the various bands of Apaches. And you'll have the Tigua Indians that came down from New Mexico and fleeing with the Spanish when there was a Native, one of the very few successful Native American insurrections in 1680 in Santa Fe when Popat rose up and they expelled the Spanish for 10 years. And they came to El Paso with their Tigua allies. So yeah, and then of course up there in the Panhandle. So yeah, there's a lot of your tribes is going to depend on geography. How can they interact with their terrain, with what grows there, what plants grow there, what animals grow there, what animals are native, and so on, what vegetation is native, and that will determine, in many cases, how large that tribe is, where they're at, what rivers are available, all that.
One of the other questions I had somebody ask me about was, do you have anything to say about the Bright Ranches? I've heard there's some pretty interesting stuff.
Well, Bright Ranch over by Marfa has a very, of course, interesting history, and it was one of the early cattle ranches, and it probably we're not really going to have any cattle ranches out here. The first impetus is going to, for any cattle ranches in West Texas, is going to be the creation of the fort in 4 days. Now, the fort was built. Got to back up just a little bit. Why is 4 days even here? Why was that the first place in West Texas to have as far as a European American type of settlement? We already had El Paso, but of course that was a pass to get from the Spanish to get to Mexico, to get to the gold in Santa Fe from Mexico City. And there were explorations that were launched into the Big Bend area, but this was kind of the boonies. Nobody wanted to be stationed out here. So, and there wasn't, we didn't have the gold and we didn't have the silver that the Spain was looking for. Well, the first impetus of why there's going to be any American presence here, the gold in California. So the California gold rush, we're going to fight a war with Mexico. U.S.-Mexico War, short war that we win, and we were this manifest destiny. We were expanding westward, and that was the whole point, to fight the war. And then we defeated Mexico, and we took what's today the American Southwest. We took as our war prize what's today Arizona, Mexico, California, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, all that. As part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that we signed in 1848, it called for the mapping of the boundary between the two countries now. So we're going to have to send out cartographers. To be an Army cartographer, that's what we're going to send out of the Army. We're going to send out William Emery. First, he's just a cartographer of the expedition. He ends up leading the expedition and spending about 6 years of his life going from San Diego, California, all the way down to Brownsville, Texas, mapping the boundary between the two countries. Mexico was doing the same thing on their side until their commissioner died. Salazar passed away. But we ended up doing it. We mapped the boundary between the two countries. Notice I said the date of the treaty when the war ended was 1848. It's going to be that same period that the gold is discovered along the banks of the American River in California. Initially, that gold was Mexican gold, but a few weeks later, it becomes American gold. And of course, it takes about a year for the word to get out. That's why it's the San Francisco 49ers, not the 48ers. Because the 49ers, that's what the team is named after. It was the 49ers that headed west to go try to get that gold in California. And of course, Washington, D.C. wanted it back in D.C. So we wanted California to become a state. So we could tax it, get all that money and everything. Well, you had various options of how you're going to get to California. One option, get on a ship. Now, let's say you left London, left New York, whatever. The quickest way, the safest, the quickest way, and probably maybe the least bothersome way, get on a ship, sail all the way down around the tip of South America, back up the Pacific Ocean to San Francisco, and then short off to jump to Sacramento. If everything worked out, you could do that in 4 months. But about 1 out of every 4 ships was never heard from again. So some people didn't really like that 25% casualty rate.
So that's a little bit rough.
Another option: sail to Panama, walk across the Isthmus of Panama, and then take another boat up to Sacramento. The problem with that is yellow fever. About 1 out of every 5 people that did that died of yellow fever. So they began looking for what's going to end up being a little bit longer route: sail to New Orleans, then up the Mississippi River, and then take a portion of Missouri River, and then you can cross across to California from like Independence, Missouri. There's 3 problems with that. One, you have 2 mountain ranges in your way. You have the highest part of the Rocky Mountains in your way, and then you have the most rugged of the Sierra Nevadas in your way. In between those 2 mountain ranges, you have a desert. But waiting for you before you get to any of that are the Sioux Indians, the Crow, and the Cheyenne. And they're masters of the plains, and they're not just submitting peacefully, just saying, please come. Now that Emory has mapped the boundary between 2 countries, though, a new road opens up. And that route will be from Galveston to San Antonio. San Antonio, you wait and form a wagon train till you get maybe 100, 200 wagons, hire a guide, and then you take the road that Emory mapped west. It is the safest, it is the longest of all the routes. It takes on an average 9 months to get from San Antonio to Sacramento. But this right here, where in Alpine is, where you cross the Rocky Mountains. Right. You know where the water holes are. They've already been mapped. The only one of the main dangers, besides drought, which you got the water, main dangers is the Apache Indians. But the Apaches don't have anywhere near the numbers like the Sioux, or the Crow, and the Cheyenne on the High Plains. The largest group of Apache warriors ever assembled was 70. Oh. So what the Army did was they built a series of forts along that route. Forts like Fort Davis, forts like Fort Bliss. And then the soldiers would provide escort to the wagon trains when they arrived from fort to fort. No wagon train was ever attacked by Apaches. They never had the numbers. So it was the safest route. No fort was ever attacked by Apaches. It was the longest route, but it was the safest route. And over 80,000 people traveled on that route to get to the gold field in California. Wow. And so that's why we're here. And then all that will eventually lead to land conflict with Indians. So that brings up what you were talking about, yeah. And of course, what side of the Texas Range is going to take?
Well, yeah, we kind of know how history went that way.
Yep.
Well, I think that's about as good a place today to go ahead and edit. We're just
okay. Yeah, we appreciate that.
I do have one last question, and that is: do you have any upcoming exhibits at the museum that you're excited about?
Well, the next exhibit is Trappings of Texas. It's our largest fundraiser of the year. Trappings doesn't have nothing to do with animal traps. Trappings comes from an old Spanish word "trapa," meaning horse cover. Today, it has come to mean anything associated with cowboy art and gear. Saddles, spurs, bits, paintings. And we are the oldest trapping show in the nation here at the Museum of Big Bend. And so we are going to be doing, I think it's our 33rd or 34th trappings coming up. Some of the most amazing artists, an art show. And all the stuff is for sale. The artists get 75%. We get maybe get 70%, we get 30% of the museum, making it our largest fundraiser of the year. So that's coming up. We're already working on it, and because it's a lot of work. And we do work with local ranchers and artists. But people come from all over the country to take part in the show. It's a jury show. So the Cowboy Artists Association of America and other art organizations like that assign jurors to determine, is this braid work good enough to be in the show? Is this saddle good enough to be? This leather carving, this silver work, this all this kind of stuff. And so they determine, who's going to be part of the show. But we get to introduce. We have a small role to play in introducing new artists in the field, and then from there they go off to take part in other trapping show around the nation, and eventually it all culminates at the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City.
Well, you guys heard it. If you guys come up to the Big Bend, you definitely don't want to miss the museum exhibits.
There you go.
Matt, I really appreciate you coming out and talking to me. I really enjoyed this. And
well, I did too, and we appreciate it. We'll do it another time again.
That sounds good.
So, all right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.